Hi, I'm Arielle Davis, and this is Between Generations. What stands between generations? Is it time? Is it experience? Is it morals? Are we living in the same world as the generations that came before us? Or have we redefined a new normal? In this series, we dive into how we can heed the lessons of the past and integrate them into a future that unites us all, between generations. Voting is the right of every American citizen. It's a right that women marched for. It's a right that Black people fought and died for.
See, I grew up in the time when you couldn't go to certain stores, you couldn't go to certain restaurants. Even if you worked at a restaurant, you had to go in through the back door. Only time you went out to the front was if you were the best busboy and you were picking up the dishes. When you couldn't sit at the Chris's counters. I grew up in those times. When you got on the bus, you had to go to the back of the bus. Even if there were seats in the front of the bus, you had to go to the back of the bus. If there were no seats in the back of the bus, you had to stand up, even though there were seats in the front of the bus. I grew up in that era.
Yeah.
So when it came to now I can participate in trying to make a difference, that was super important for me. And I know that there were those who died because of trying to get the right to vote. So it was very important for me that now that I have this privilege to make sure that I take advantage of it. It was troubling. It was very trying. It was heart rendering. But we were used to it because that's the life we lived. We didn't fight it because we didn't know to fight it. So when the process came to where now we're really trying to get to voting and making sure that we have the right to vote, that was an exciting time.
I think the issues are the same, and the biggest difference I think is in eras. Voting way back when, it wasn't easy because there was a very strong effort to keep Black people from voting. So it was back during that time when I did vote. I voted more in Tulsa than I have anyplace else. But my experience in McAlester was a little bit scary at first, but then it was also a sense of pride. But in a small town, we were segregated in segregated communities. So it really wasn't that big of a deal other than the fact that I could now vote. And I took it very seriously because my teachers helped us to understand how important it was to exercise this right to vote. And I grew up in a time when I could see on television things that were going on in the further south about how people were being prevented from voting, and when people that were lynched, it was just an awful thing. And so it was really important to vote.
Voting is inherently generational. Its value and importance is passed down by family members and school systems.
I know that my family is definitely a huge inspiration. I remember as a little kid, whenever it was time to vote, no matter how big or small the election was, my grandma, mom, aunt, sister, and I, they always took us to see them vote, just so that we would know that it's important and that it really isn't an option.
My parents were very avid, keep up with what's going on. My dad would get upset at us if we were talking when the news was on. So my mom and my dad always, I knew that they went to vote. I didn't know at the time about political parties. And my influencers were my parents and my teachers, because we had excellent teachers talking about the democracy. Our principal was a female, which was unusual back during that time. And every Wednesday, we had an assembly, and every Wednesday we talked about democracy, and we had to do presentations about different democratic principles and Black leaders and things like this. We didn't realize, we were learning informally, but we did. So the biggest influencers would be my parents and my teacher.
Voting is not always passed on as important in each family. It is the right that people have become disillusioned about its level of power. Older voters have a long-term commitment to voting because its history is not far removed from their memories or experiences. They want to encourage and implore younger generations to exercise a right that has not always been available for everyone.
Seeing my parents and my grandparents come through, the things that I read about other Blacks coming through, it was very important for me. It was like, wow, something that I've always wanted to do has finally happened. And I also understood the suffering that they had to go through to make that happen.
I know a lot of times as a young person, we're left feeling like those are grown-up issues. Like, what can I do to cause any slight change in how things are going right now? But I can say now that I'm a little older, and being an African-American young woman growing up in a country that has constantly tried to silence us, and even just as a young person of color in general, we've always, we never really mattered to a system that was created for people that didn't look like us.
It's very important to me because it is the only way, the most significant way that people living in a democracy can have a voice. We live in a representative democracy, meaning that we usually send other people to represent us, but voting is my direct voice in the democracy in which I live.
Even though times have changed, voting still has obstacles, issues with voter suppression, turnout, and not to mention a global pandemic, which has completely changed life as we know it. Regardless of hardships, it's important to remain hopeful for positive change and to do our part in making the world a better place for everyone.
I would say, first of all, out of respect for those who paid some tremendous prices for us to be able to vote, you have to exercise that privilege.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot disrespect what those persons went through in order to get the right to vote for Black people. That's a driver itself.
Mm-hmm.
That should be inspiration enough itself for every Black person to vote. Because that trail was a difficult trail. There was a lot of blood in that trail,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of hurt in that trail. There was a lot of suffering in that trail. So out of respect for that, it's incumbent upon us to vote. Talk with those who have been here a moment, who have journeyed for a moment, who understand the journey. Talk to them. And that may even help you understand on which side you need to vote. Because you may not have had the experiences that I had. It may not mean as much to you as it meant to me, but my sharing my experiences, my giving my testimony of those times should at least help you understand, well, hey, I got to vote. Now, who I vote for is my business, it's my privilege, but I at least have to vote. So I encourage the first-time voter, all my grandkids, hey, get registered so you can vote. Who am I voting for? You have to study, look at things, make your determination. I'm not going to tell you. I will share with you some of my experiences, but you got to make your own decision.
Talk with somebody, make sure you understand the process, because the process itself can be very intimidating. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel uncomfortable. There are ways now that you can research who the candidates are, talk with somebody, have a discussion with both sides of the fence so that you can hear both sides of the fence, or just ask somebody, well, you're voting for this person. What's your reason for voting for that person? And just listen to all sides of the story. But my biggest advice would be to be an informed voter. Don't just go and check off something on the ballot just because you have the right to do that. You need to be an informed voter.
I really believe in giving back, and I believe that if I use my voice as a young person, if I could get out there and say, hey, I'm only 18 and I just went and voted for the first time, and it feels amazing because, you know, it's helping our community, which is ultimately what we want to see. So it's helping me by bringing those feelings of joy and excitement, and also influencing other people that are my age to go vote, and because it really does matter.
Well, I love Tulsa because it has been my home for most of my life, and I've raised my family here.
Mhm.
And in spite of all the drawbacks that I could name, Tulsa is not a terrible place at all to raise a family and to live. So I've made my living here. I'm a retired educator. I've contributed to many people here in the city of Tulsa in many different ways. So I enjoy living in Tulsa.
Working experience with corporate America, I had some opportunities to move to some other cities.
Mhm.
I love Tulsa because it was a good place to raise a family. You know, this is back in the 60s, early 70s. It was a good place to raise a family. All of my life, most of my life since the age of 11 have been spent here in Tulsa.
Mhm.
I've made a lot of contributions to Tulsa. And I want the benefit of those contributions to Tulsa, not only for myself, but even for my family, for my friends, for my community. I worked hard to help Tulsa become what Tulsa has become. You know, I did that. I worked awful hard to bring about peace among the races, equality among the individuals. I worked hard for that. I want to see the benefit of that work.
Mhm.
So I love Tulsa. There are a lot of good people in Tulsa. I have a lot of friends in Tulsa on both sides of the track.
When I hear the word Tulsa, think of the word Tulsa, I just, even more specifically North Tulsa, I think of home and family. And I love the history that Tulsa has. It's such a resilient place. Once again, even more specifically, North Tulsa and growing up in the Greenwood district, it's such a resilient place. And I love that because I like to think that some of North Tulsa's resiliency has, you know, evolved in me. I see a lot of that in myself, and I truly believe that's become because of where I came from and who I was raised by.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Between Generations. Voting is important because it impacts us all. So be sure that you're participating in local and national elections. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. Thank you so much for joining us for Between Generations.